So it's my great honor. I'm Susanna Tuttle. I'm the director of the Eco-Justice Connection program here at the Council of Churches. And I was really excited because I got to sign up for this session because I wanted to learn from this session. And it's a great privilege and honor to get to introduce our speakers today. So we have Alexandra Sirota and Suzy Khachaturyan. Did I do it? All right, great. With the Budget and Tax Center, the North Carolina Budget and Tax Center. So I'm going to read their bios and then let them come up and teach us all about what we need to learn and advocate for on behalf. So Alexandria served as executive director for the Budget and Tax Center. She leads the organization's work to ensure every person can reach their full potential and achieve well-being through the support of trustworthy, anti-racist institutions and systems that we all participate in building. Suzy leverages the power of state budget and tax decisions to document needs across the state, mobilize the public and policymakers to support equitable policy choices, and build lasting collaborations with partners to draw connections between fiscal issues and their missions. And so they're going to come up and speak to us. We are grateful at the Council of Churches to be a partner with the Budget and Tax Center. And yeah, teach away.
Great. Well, thank you all for choosing Budget and Taxes on this morning. We're very excited to be with you. And as the title said for this session, we do really see budget and tax decisions as about our future, our communities, and really our well-being. So just really excited to be with you to talk about this. Today's agenda, we're going to talk about more about why budgets matter, talk about the budget process, and then particularly dig deeper into what is happening right now. In fact, right today, as we speak, the Senate is considering their budget proposal. So that's our plan. Nope, not going to work. I'll just tell you a little bit about our organization, the Budget and Tax Center. You heard our mission statement, our vision statement. We really do believe that North Carolina can be a great place to live, but that the decisions about what we invest in and how we support each other really matter to get to that place. And that really our full participation and inclusion of everyone in the decisions about how our dollars are spent is critical. A little bit about how we work to get to that vision. We document fiscal and economic conditions in communities. Some of you may have seen our county snapshots is one tool that provides data on what's happening in communities each year. But we also are working to document how spending decisions impact communities. We look at connecting communities and leaders to the policy process, particularly in the space of budget and tax policy. These are often hard to access, not very open processes, and so one of our goals is to really connect people to the process. And then we do have a good suite of ideas and solutions, and we're always looking for more from community members who really know what's going on in their community and what's working. But we're looking to advance those solutions to serve the common good. So that's how we approach our work. If you go to the next slide. And as I said at the beginning, budgets matter. They matter as a tool to support families and their ability to thrive. Budgets are our best way to make sure that no matter who you are or where you live, you can connect to opportunity. They're also a critical tool in our democracy. Budgets matter because they're ultimately the decision about where our resources go. And when we have a voice in that decision, we are able to make sure our democracy, our policy process reflects the priorities of the people. Unfortunately, budget choices in the past decade have really followed from the prioritization of tax cuts for the wealthy. And this has meant that we have underinvested or not invested in many of the priorities that people have in their communities. I shared 2 examples here, but there are many, and I would love to hear more about what you see in your community. But really what we saw during the COVID-19 pandemic was stark. The challenges facing public health departments to ramp up the public awareness campaigns, the vaccination efforts, were only bolstered because of federal dollars. The state had for years been underinvesting in public health, had in fact been cutting back on public health staffing and services in such a way that when we had to ramp up, it was much more challenging to do so.
So I have a question about the North Carolina courts.
Sure.
They apparently have been increasing fines and fees for several years as a way to self-fund their operation. Sure. Is their budget part of this, or is that a completely separate thing?
That is all part of this, and that is another aspect or trend that we've seen in recent years, is a shift to a fee model for financing. And we could do a whole course on why fees are not the way to go, but fee-for-service ways of financing the public good or the common good is not effective, because what it ends up doing is asking more from those with the least ability to pay. It's a flat dollar figure no matter what your income is, most often. And it also sort of suggests that this public good, a justice system that delivers justice to all, is something that you pay when you use it, rather than we all contribute to make sure it's there for everybody. So those are some of the challenges we see with that approach. But one of the things that's notable about yesterday's press conference is that Senator Berger, in fact, noted that there were quite a few fees that they decided in this budget to raise because they hadn't been raised in quite some time. And at the same time, they're cutting the income tax again. So you see very stark choices in these budgets, a decision to raise fines and fees and reduce income taxes that will primarily benefit the wealthy. Another way in which the budget choices have sort of flowed from the prioritization of tax cuts is in the public school arena. Many of you likely follow the state's constitutional obligation to provide every child with a sound basic education. That's been determined now by multiple court processes, and yet we still fall far short of that constitutional requirement. And one of the impacts, among many, is a teacher shortage, challenges in making sure that there are teachers in every classroom. We see long bus routes and challenges with disruptions to bus routes. We see a lack of access to early childhood education, and so on and so forth. So the real connection point here is that as policymakers have prioritized these tax cuts, they've reduced the dollars available, and then they've made choices to cut back on those public systems and public services. This pattern, a lot of times folks ask, is it because of the tax cuts that we have the budget cuts? Is the budget cuts driving the tax cuts? In the end, I think it's a both-and situation. We have both a legislative leadership that is very committed to the idea that government is not able to deliver the kinds of goods and services that people need, and that it's better for the private sector to do that, and that our public funds are better put back into the pockets and bank accounts of the very wealthy. Next slide. So just to say that we've been on this path for more than a decade, and make no mistake, the goal here for legislative leaders is to get to zero income tax, complete elimination of the income tax, which right now represents almost half, if not more than half, of our general fund dollars. So all the dollars that come into the state, more than half comes from income taxes. The plan to get to zero would mean finding other ways to raise that money, fines and fees, increases to sales tax, shifts to locals through things like property taxes, or very deep budget cuts.
You have a chart that illustrates that, so that as this line comes down, the other lines are going up?
I don't know if we put that in here, but we do have something similar. One thing that I would say is the starkest difference right now is still the corporate income tax. So if you go to the next one, the corporate income tax is scheduled to go to zero. It will go to zero by 2030, absent a change in the state legislature. Right now, the debate this year about the personal income tax is whether it should go to 2.499. Right now, we're at 4.75. Why 2.499? Does anybody have a guess?
Less than 2.5.
It's not 2.5, and 2.5 is the lowest personal income tax rate in the country that has a personal income tax. So they're trying to go right below the lowest. So it's a completely arbitrary number, means nothing relative to what that, the dollars that we need.
So, I'm gonna shut up here, because I tend to ask too many questions.
No, you're fine.
So, do you have any information, if you look across the states, as other states have done this, or other states have had very low taxes for a long time, and the impact on the economy?
Yes, we do, and I'm happy to share some links to that right now. I mean, the bottom line is that we don't see income taxes having a significant impact on job growth or wage growth. When you look over the past 10 years of data, even for North Carolina, you hear a lot of claims, right, that North Carolina's recovery has been very strong. But when you look at our trajectory, so our employment growth, our wage growth, within the context of the southeast region, it's the same line. So what you would expect is that when we cut taxes, the line would shift, right? It would accelerate going up faster. We don't see that in the data. And what we do see, of course, is persistently high poverty rates, persistently high concentrations of people in living in working poverty. So working but not earning enough to make ends meet. And so we have not sort of disrupted the economic patterns that exist through tax cuts. And we shouldn't expect to, because to what you're asking, the evidence across the country, the evidence of national efforts to cut taxes has not delivered an economic return. Yeah.
Which states are the most direct comps in terms of size of the economy, and then which are the most direct comps with regard to like level of income tax and like the variation, like kind of your two paths taken?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's a hard one. So we have typically compared ourselves to Ohio, Wisconsin, and then our region, because we always get compared to Virginia and Tennessee, South Carolina. In terms of comparison, in terms of mix of economy, Ohio and Wisconsin used to be very similar. They're less so now because we've lost so much manufacturing. But the size of their economy and the difference in paths is interesting. The comparison, I think, to North Carolina that I would make is Minnesota, which is on a very different path than ours, and Michigan right now. They've sort of shifted direction and moved towards more progressive tax policies that are delivering dollars and allowing them to do things like expand school meals to every child, universal school meal access, for example. Next slide. We would love to hear from you all, impacts you see in your community from public budgets. What are you seeing, the good, the bad, the ugly, the in between?
Hi, my name is Christine, and right now there's a group of people in Alamance County So we're trying to raise up some alarms that that the county commissioners would like to invest in the refurbishment of a courthouse and take those monies from the Alamance School Board. With failing and really disastrous teacher shortages, about 50% empty seats, no investment in mental health, lots of investment in school resource officers, and kind of disastrous facilities.
Thank you. That's a terrible
It's disgusting.
choice point, but it's telling.
Mm-hmm.
Others?
Hi, my name's Tara. I'm from a group called Disability Rights North Carolina, and we're deeply engaged in the budget the past several years. And what we see is a continued trend of defunding services, especially health access services for people with disabilities. There's a wait list of about 16,000 people now for a service called the waiver, which would allow people to stay in the community rather than get their services in institutions. Really disappointed in this year's budget for that. It only fills 350 spots. But that's just one of many things that we've seen, kind of a trend toward funding institutional-based care, both for healthcare and for living facilities for people with disabilities, rather than putting that money into the community services so that people can get their services in the community. And so that's kind of a big problem, and on the healthcare side.
Yeah. Is that, are the institutions private institutions primarily?
Both. So yeah, the state-run institutions, their funding is much more secure and stable, but the private institutions as well. So we see, influxes for things like, and our organization monitors in a lot of the facilities too. So we see a lot of the abuse and neglect and problems that go on in those facilities, like the adult care homes, the intermediate care facilities, the skilled nursing facilities, psych hospitals, all those. And so there's a mix of public and private.
Great.
Yeah.
That's super helpful. Yeah.
I would like to know how you arrived at the 13.8 million for a reentry process and helping with mental health facilities. How did you arrive at that? And how could we have helped you get it passed?
The reentry, yes. Well, we didn't actually work on the reentry figure. So just to say that's not our number in terms of dollar figures.
Where did it come from?
Good question. My sense is that it came from OSBM, the Office of State Budget and Management, in an analysis with the Governor's Commission on Reentry that just recently formed a year ago, I want to say. I think it was a year ago. But the number, as I understand it, comes from an assessment of what the reentry councils have communicated in terms of needs around job training, housing, transportation. Whether that's a comprehensive number, I'm not sure, but I think the challenge with getting anything through in terms of expanded investments is breaking through on this narrative that helping people through public services is positive, a net positive for the state. The narrative right now is that doing that is a net negative for the economy, for communities, because it creates dependency, it creates challenges. And so I think that to answer your question, the opportunity for all of us is to change the conversation and to be really clear about how important public investments are to really advancing our shared goals as a state.
So would it have been beneficial had the budget department included bullet points, talking points that we, the people, might have used to help you get that passed?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're happy to provide talking points as we can about different issues. I will say that we tend to follow the lead in reentry of the Fair Chance Project at the North Carolina Justice Center and Forward Justice. Those are two groups, and then the third group is Second Chance Alliance. But we have produced material fact sheets and other information to make the case. But again, we're not a state agency. We are a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that advocates for better budget decisions. So we, like all of you, are trying to push for better budgets in the near term and the long term, and working with partners to make that happen.
Oh, I saw another hand raised. Someone want to add something?
I don't have the numbers on it, but for the triangle area, the funding for public transit is just quite poor, and that could be a huge boon to the area. Right now, it takes several hours usually to get around town.
Yeah. These are great.
The last one I was going to mention was education. Where do we even start? But the lack of investment from the state in infrastructure. So the 13.7 billion that we need to meet the needs of infrastructure just for buildings, and we haven't had a school bond in this millennium. I don't think we've had a school bond. Yeah, a statewide school bond. The numbers are staggering to the point some counties are not even reporting their full amount of need because they know they'll never get it.
Well, and is there, I mean, it seems to me there's a trend for wealthy counties to basically try to fill the gap,
Right, yeah.
which is good for that county, but it also tends to mask the issues to the population because they don't see it.
And it creates further inequity.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's why we do work both at the state and local level, but the state opportunity is to really create greater equity across the state, because even if you are able to be successful at the local level and getting a local budget decision, again, it won't necessarily be available to all communities, and then you do
Right.
get the inequity creeping in.
I think behind all this that's a concern for me is the change in the law about election map drawing, where now one can be partisan in doing that, and ensuring a supermajority for either party is not good for the budget process at all.
Yes, that's right.
So I'm really concerned the next
Depends on
maps
who you are.
are really going to transform the budget process so that there's no amount of advocacy that will be heard.
That's a great segue.
Yeah, that's a great segue to the budget process. Perfect. Yeah, I agree. I think it's a really important point.
Yeah, no, exactly. To literally the exact point that you're making. Gerrymandering has contributed to lack of transparency, lack of public input in the budget process. And so in addition to working with many of you all and other partners of ours to address the issue-specific needs, we're also interested in advancing a better budget process, because over the years we have some specific information that we'll talk about, but we're really interested in how we can build a better budget, how we can come together to demand a more transparent process, how we can, work with folks like you all and the communities that you're coming from, the folks that you serve if you work at an organization, to build awareness about the choices that are being made in the budget. I think often they're not presented as choices. It's sort of, we have to work within the constraints of the revenue that we've generated, when we know that those are the result of choices being made. Coming together to demand a more equitable tax code. We'll kind of go through some more data points about some of the proposals that have come up in this year's budget debate, and then as we've started to touch on how to kind of make more clear how public investments, as we've been talking about so far, how public investments can be a tool to lead to more equitable anti-racist outcomes rather than inflicting more harm. Yes.
Is there, I've been thinking recently it'd be very helpful to have a scorecard that shows, here's what your politicians at work, here's what the legislature and so forth have done,
Yeah.
and here's the impact.
Yeah.
Is there any kind of scorecard like that?
There are examples that I've seen. I think those are more at the local level as far as the ones that I've seen, but this is something that we've heard an interest in from some folks, I think especially in the past several months, because of the lack of transparent process.
It might be a way to try to hold people accountable.
Yeah,
Which
I
doesn't-
completely
it's
agree.
a complicated thing, so.
Yeah, I think one of the things we're also trying to do is to better document, for example, specifically the timeline. So literally as we speak, the Senate is at 11:30 coming back to take amendments on their proposed budget that was released at 4 p.m. yesterday. It's been out for less than 24 hours. And this afternoon it's going to go through Senate Appropriations and Senate Finance. The average North Carolinian does not have the time or the interest, really, let's be honest, in tracking these things closely. So I think
Legislators don't even have time to read it.
exactly.
I mean, how
this
can
is
you read it?
it's
It's not 2 pages.
right. It's nearly
How many hundreds of
1,000
pages?
nearly 1,000 pages.
1,000 pages in less than 24 hours. I mean,
It's
you
outrageous.
Can't, you literally can't read that.
Literally can't read it.
How can it be allowed? I mean, that
no
just.
law against it.
They make the rules. They change the rules. It's
And they will set the clock. They'll change the clock. To literally in the legislature, they'll change the clock to have something be on the day before. They'll stop it at 11:59 so that it votes the day before.
Oh,
I had a legislator tell me that
Oh my
who I wouldn't even agree with, and he was like, "Oh yeah, we changed the clock around to make stuff."
There was a question in the back. Did you have another question?
So my question is, how can we change that?
yeah.
Blow them out.
I think for us at the Budget and Tax Center, one thing that we're really committed to doing is, as I said, sort of making this information more available to people so that people can feel empowered to, say something to their lawmakers, to the folks that represent them, because the other piece of this is that, nearly half of the lawmakers are being excluded from this process, if not more than half, They're told to, or, they, as Suzanne said, they read the budget when it's posted online, which is the same time I see the budget. And they have to vote yes or no on a budget that is nearly 1,000 pages and that has implications for every North Carolinian, whether they know it or not. So, did you have a follow-up question?
Well, just at the federal level, I know they have, you balance the budget websites, pluses and minuses, you can play with it. Is there anything like that for North Carolina?
I don't think, no, there's not for the state level. But to the point that Alexandra made earlier, I think it's sort of this, sort of a chicken and an egg analogy where they, cut taxes so we have fewer dollars to spend while they're making budget cuts. And because we've there's constraints that have been put in place that are the result of a series of choices made over the last decade. But I think the artificial constraints make an exercise like that really challenging. I don't know if you want to add anything to that. But.
It would almost take a constitutional change to have standing rules, like a budget process that requires 2 weeks, that couldn't be changed while it's 75% vote, a super majority of the House or the Senate. So the kind of advocacy we're going to have to do is really changing the Constitution, because as one of my parishioners says, who won election, elections have consequences, and I argue with him that makes it a war, not really about representing the people. And so when you have that mindset, when you win the election, you can do what you want. And we really need the people to say, here are the boundaries, and you have to work within these boundaries. And it's going to take a constitutional change to do that, because they can get elected, change the rules, and can do a vote in 30 seconds if they want to.
I think I agree. I mean, I think there needs to be parameters around it. I also, and maybe this is Pollyannish, but I'll say it. I also think that this work of returning back to what it means to be a public servant is a part of it too, to your point, like that's been lost along the way. And in an ideal world, we wouldn't have to change this Constitution all the time to put in place parameters. We could do that statutorily and people would follow those guidelines. And I do think, to the broader point, that the public, sort of what will make the change for us as a 501c3 organization, we believe that the information that people have and changing that narrative is going to put the pressure necessary for people to make different choices. But it's a longer term trajectory that we're on, and we're cognizant of that. But it is really critical that we keep doing that work to inform people about what's happening.
Could I just say too that one of the pieces that I think is important in the narrative is that there's like billions of dollars in a rainy day slush fund. We're sitting on kind of a Leandro decision too, which was basically saying here's the money, here's what you need to do in your public schools.
Yeah.
So how do we actually lift up the fact that the money is there?
We contact Nels Roseland and make sure that he releases the funds and withdraws his objection to the North Carolina Supreme Court so that Leandro cannot go before the court again this summer, because that will be devastating. 29 years worth of work.
Yeah.
I've got postcards upstairs and phone numbers.
But, I mean, the challenge is that it's an ideological article of faith, that small government is good.
Right.
And they'll just say that rainy day fund, well, that's why we need to cut taxes, because we have all this money we don't use.
I think in particular now, in light of a possible, likely, not to use the R word, but recession, I think it's used as a way to justify, see how great we've done. We've stashed literally billions of dollars away. This is financial responsibility.
How much does it sit at right now? Do you know? Over 6?
Well, so in the press conference yesterday, they said that in the Senate budget, it will, by the end of the biennium, so 2025, it'll reach $5 billion.
Yeah.
And that's just in the rainy day fund, which is the savings reserve. That's, never mind all the other
But isn't it
reserve
already
accounts.
over 6? So that would be 5 additional?
No, I think it would total $5 billion.
Yeah.
But there are many different funds, and sometimes people
Combine.
conflate the multiple funds. So we have some slides that we want to go through, but we encourage questions and discussion. But so an example of what I just said, that the state budget is every 2 years the state puts together a 2-year budget, and that's what's called the biennium. In odd years, as we're in right now, it's a quote-unquote long session, sometimes a very, very long session, and that's where they establish the full 2-year budget. And then in even years, like we had last year and like we'll have next year, it's technically a short session, and that's when they make revisions on the second year of the budget that was passed in the prior year. So technically every year in North Carolina, we're making a budget. Sometimes it just alternates whether it's a 2-year budget or a 1-year budget. And then as we had in 2019, when we did not actually have a final budget, the state actually has there's a plan for what to do when that happens, and so the state then reverts to the prior year spending plan. It's that more specifically, we go back to the recurring fund. So sometimes in the budget they put in just 1 year of funding, and those 1-year fundings, sorry, I'm not saying this articulately, the recurring funding is what the state reverts to. So things like 1-year funding, those are not included when we do not have a final budget and revert to prior year spending. Sorry, that was very confusing. So I'm not going to go through all of these steps, but just very briefly, and it may be too small to read in the back, but we are currently at step 6, where each legislative chamber is working on their version of the budget. This year, the House started the process, and so in April, they approved their budget in a week's time. It was introduced and fully passed by the chamber, and so now the Senate is working on their version of the budget. Those two versions are different, and so once the Senate passes their budget, which is going to be this Thursday, according to Senator Berger, they will then go into what's called a conference committee, where there's some members of the House and some members of the Senate, and they meet behind closed doors to negotiate a conference budget. That is then released. The Senate will vote on the conference report, and it's just a yes or no vote. There's no amendments that can be made on a conference report. Then it will go to the House. If the House agrees, it goes to the governor. The governor can sign it or veto it. And if the governor signs it, it's then implemented. If the governor vetoes it, then the House and the Senate can vote to override it. So that's sort of the process that we have ahead of us.
How is the conference committee appointed?
Good question. The leadership in both chambers decides.
And how many?
The powers that be.
How many people?
I don't know that there's a set number.
Sometimes it can be like 50 people, but I think the appearance of the committee is one thing, and then who makes the decisions is another. So it tends to be Senator Berger and Speaker Moore make the decisions. To some extent, the appropriations chairs in the House and the Senate would have some influence, and to some extent the House and Senate finance chairs, those tend to be the most powerful chairs or committees in the budget process.
If you're gonna target people, the appropriations chairs are your target people, besides Berger and Moore.
Right. So, I'm sorry.
If I'm correct, what you've just told us is that the budget goes through a tweaking process. Now, the question is, if something has been taken out of the budget initially, is there any chance that during this tweaking process that it might be put back in?
Yeah.
And if so, how do we do that?
So I think the best way is to get, the guarantee is to get Berger or Moore to put it in.
Yeah.
Absent that, I think the work is to find as many conference committee members who can influence Berger and Moore in the committee process.
Okay, I'm a dummy. I don't know who these people are. Are you available? Do you have something available?
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
Help
Let's
people
talk
do
about-
this?
Yep.
Because I'm an old man, and I think I represent a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. No, we can be in touch about who to contact and how. Happy to provide that information for you.
I hope
all.
to see you after the session.
Okay, sounds great.
I would say too, in my experience, and I'm curious if you all agree, that although this last minute session after the budget is released and then they go into conference is pretty much, a done deal. It's behind closed doors, and it's that if folks want to go to their own representative or senator throughout the budget discussions, like in the months before the budget, it's too late at this point, but in future years, develop a relationship with their own member, then that person can kind of carry the message better than going directly to some of the, like Berger and Moore, who are a little less available. Is that what you have as well?
I think yes, absolutely. That connection is so important, not just to get the outcome that we want, which I would be a little bit more pessimistic about whether again, the process is so insulated right now that legislators don't even know what's happening with the budget before they see it, as Suzy said. So I think the value of communicating with legislators is for them to be champions on the issue on the floor, in committee, to continue to bring up the issue, because right now the narrative that gets transferred out to the broader public through the media is, this is a great budget, it has a, whatever Berger said in the press conference, that's the quote in the media. And so, again, having people sort of explain what the impacts are of the choices that are in these budgets is going to be the work of legislators. They have much more amplification capacity.
In terms of advocacy, does it make sense to start, like, if we're thinking about this, it's in January of that even year that we're really, or the odd year, sorry, that we're really hitting up, because in June it's already done and dusted.
Yeah, I'd say the earlier the better. And
Now for
going back to the-
2025. I mean, like, it's a long game, so it's starting now to work on the next one.
Yeah, no, one of the things I was going to point to was the process slide, and all of that, you don't necessarily need to go back to it, but essentially these budgets are being crafted, on a constant cycle. So as soon as they finish this budget, they're going to start thinking about the next budget. And so the timing is important. But yeah, I think the sooner the better. I think January makes a lot of sense.
And it just seems to me what they're trying to do is they've given Cooper Medicare, so now they're trying to figure out what's the absolute max we could get on our agenda that he will have to sign off on because he wants Medicare.
Right.
Sorry, Medicaid, right?
Yeah, Medicaid.
Yeah, so does everybody know what he's talking about? That they tied the budget,
The
the
Medicaid
Medicaid expansion to the passage of the budget?
Yeah.
Budget? Okay.
Yeah, and they'll throw everything in the kitchen sink in because they know he won't be able to veto it.
Where do you want to go? Should we do
The
this?
worst education budget
Yeah.
we've seen. It's truly devastating.
So just,
Wow.
So this is one of the kinds of slides that we're sort of known for. It's my personal favorite slide. This one in particular is showing you where the governor's budget, so these two green lines represents the governor's represented budget for this the biennium that's starting in on July 1st of this year. And it's putting into context over the past 50 plus years. And what you're looking at is spending or proposed spending, in the case of these two green lines, green bar lines, compared to the size of the state's economy. And so you can see that when these bars decline, those typically represent recession. So here in '84, here a little bit in the 90s, here we have the 2008, the Great Recession. Typically, historically, when those bars go down, they then go up because the economy is stimulated, spending goes up, but spending goes down during recession. So what we saw after the Great Recession in North Carolina is that's also when the tax cut experiment started around 2013. And so that's where we were talking about, tax cuts happening, but spending also being cut. And so we had never quite recovered. And so the difference between where these blue lines are and the average spending is, I believe it's $7 billion. But this shows you where the governor's budget falls in line with historical spending. And then this shows you the House budget. And so it gets us, the House budget, the total got us a little bit closer to historic spending levels. But this is just like a top line picture and obviously doesn't include all of the policy provisions and all of the other important pieces there. But I think it does, if you're just looking at the, kind of the top line spending figures, I think it's helpful to kind of get a picture. We don't have this yet for the Senate budget because it came out less than 24 hours ago. The other thing, do we want to talk about this?
yeah, I would just say really quickly on the tax one, the reason the governor was able to make that shift is because he changed the trajectory we're on in terms of income tax cuts. He stopped the corporate income tax elimination, and kept the rate at the current 2.5%. And he kept in place the rate cuts for households with married filing jointly households with income under 200. So their income tax rate will go down all the way to 3.99%. But for households over 200 with income over 200,000, they will stay at the current 4.75%. So what he did was effectively back into a graduated income tax rate, a structure which taxes higher income at higher rates and is a much more sustainable way to get to adequate revenue in the long term. The House budget, in contrast, just accelerated the rate reduction slightly. Frankly, the House plan is better than the Senate plan, right? Because I told you that the House plan just moved quicker to get to the lower rate in the next year, but still stays on the same trajectory that we've been on. That's current law. That's going to happen unless there's a change. The Senate budget will go down to here by 2030.
So that stays at about 4% or 3.99?
3.99.
3.99.
Okay.
This part is 3.99.
Under the House, and that's what will happen in current law.
Okay.
Sorry, we made more slides. We'll share the slides.
Yeah, we made a lot of slides.
That's perfect.
Do you want to talk
just
about this one? Yeah.
This is like just a very brief snapshot when we're kind of comparing the governor's budget to the House budget. The governor fully funds Leandro, and that's the you can talk to Suzanne about all the details, but that's the education funding court case that's been ongoing for about 3 decades. In contrast, the House budget funds approximately 10% of Leandro, which is the remediation plan is, 10 years? 8 years.
And we're finishing year 3 of an 8-year plan right now.
Right.
Year 3 ends in June.
So each year, when each year of the plan needs to be funded, and so the House budget proposes just funding 10% in 1 year and 7% in another year. The governor's budget proposes funding to stabilize the childcare system. The House budget essentially does nothing, and that's even amid the COVID stabilization grants that supported a lot of childcare providers. The governor's budget establishes a match to draw down some additional federal funding for environmental protection. That's through the Infrastructure and Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act, and the House budget does not do that, and so it leaves billions of dollars on the table to be able to address climate infrastructure.
So maybe in the last minute we could have more discussion, because I don't know that.
Maybe just do our contact information.
Okay. Here's our. Where's our contact? Here's our contact information.
And it is my terrible job to facilitate the ending of this discussion because we're on such a tight schedule. And what I'm excited about is that I learned so much in such a short amount of time. I'm embarrassed because I didn't even understand how the Budget and Tax Center worked, which is where my friend is over at OSBI. I was like,
That's what I thought.
I have so much to learn. And as I serve as staff to the governing board, the Council of Churches Governing Board's Legislative Advocacy Committee, and I think what we need to do is have you both, maybe after session ends this year, and after the budget is passed, to do a webinar or an educational session where we can really have some time with you and have time to process the slides, do some prepared questions, and get into the details around the advocacy, because that's what I'm hearing a lot of, like, what are we supposed to do about this?
Yeah.
So
Well, and when
you
you
are an endless resource, so thank you so much.
Here are 3 ideas.
You want to read them for us and we'll close out with that?
So we have some postcards that we're happy to send to you all, and a postcard writing instruction sheet that you could bring to a community event, a church event. We have some sample letters to the editor that you could use, or we can support in crafting those, and then community conversations. We're looking to ramp those up, as you mentioned, right after the session. So open to coming out and meeting with groups that want to talk budget.
And thank you.